And now we're going to move into item 5.02, presentation and virtual day instruction plan for inclement weather. Dr. Bedell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We will have two of our cabinet members who will come up and present virtual day instruction plan for our inclement weather, very similar to what was proposed to you all as a board in the community last year. So I'll pass it over.
Good afternoon, Vice President Silkworth, members of the board, and Dr. Bedell. For the record, I am Monique Jackson, Deputy Superintendent.
And I'm Chief Communications Officer Bob Mosier. We're here to present item 5.02, Virtual Day Instruction Plan, for your information today. First, it is important to understand that the pathway set forth by the Maryland State Department of Education for the 23-24 school year, as was the case last year, is not for sustained virtual instruction of students. Rather, it is a pathway that enables local school systems to have the flexibility to repurpose certain days where it is prudent and to keep the end of the school year closer to the beginning of June. You may recall this board approved a pathway last year that followed Dr. Bedell's recommendation to use the virtual days at his discretion in place of inclement weather days. Fortunately, we did not have a need to do that last year. The MSDE pathway allows for the repurposing of up to 8 instructional days. Virtual instruction can be synchronous or asynchronous, in other words, live or in a recorded fashion, but no more than 3 instructional days can be asynchronous. The use of a virtual day for any grade or grade band will also count as one of the school system's virtual days. Synchronous days must include at least 4 hours of virtual instruction for all students, and our schedules satisfy that requirement. The MSDE pathway also mandates that attendance will be taken for all students and teachers on each virtual day. Virtual days cannot negatively impact a student's grade. There must be meaningful opportunities for students to make up work outside of virtual learning. And importantly, the pathway stipulates that no employee's pay will be negatively impacted by the decision to have a virtual day. This includes custodians, cafeterias, and workers in those categories. The days that school systems can consider for virtual instruction, as was the case last year, include inclement weather days, staff professional development days, parent-teacher conference days, and religious observance days. But also, as was the case last year, Dr. Bedell and the team are again asking the board to consider and ultimately approve a plan for 23-24 that includes the use of virtual instruction days only for inclement weather days. The timeline to enact this plan is as you see on the screen. First, the plan must be presented to the board prior to the opportunity for public comment. This presentation meets the first part of that requirement, and the plan will be posted online later today and opened up for public comment through Friday, September 15th. That comment will be presented to this board in advance of your September 20th meeting, when we will be asking for your approval of the plan. Subsequent to your approval, we will send the plan to MSDE for Superintendent Chaudhry's approval.
Students in grades 3 through 12 and all instructional staff will be expected to take devices home daily to be able to use in the event of a virtual day. Students in pre-kindergarten through grade 2 have devices at home and do not transport them to and from school. In the case of inclement weather, the superintendent will decide if a virtual day is to be used at all, and if a virtual day is to be used, whether instruction will be synchronous or asynchronous. Virtual days will count as both teacher work days and student instructional days, regardless of whether instruction is synchronous or asynchronous. The benefit to this plan is that it allows our school system, when it is prudent to do so, to continue instruction and not add days to the end of the school year to make up for inclement weather in order to meet the state's 180-day requirement. But, as Dr. Bedell has made clear last year, this does not automatically mean the end of what many have termed the good old-fashioned snow day. There may well be circumstances that make virtual instruction impractical, or the circumstances just may be right for a snow day for students and staff.
Just one final point. If a virtual day is to be used, whenever possible, the intent to do so and the type of virtual day intended to be used will be communicated to families and staff in advance. And with that, we'd be happy to try to answer any questions you have.
Ms. Frank?
Yes, thank you. So I just want to go, I love that we're keeping, the focus on snow days. I love that we have that. Every year, we tend to have at least 1 or 2 days where half the county gets rain and the other half gets ice, and we have a lot of parents who complain about that. So when we have those particular patterns of weather where, it's either all ice or half ice, that would be where we're really looking at these virtual days. Is that correct?
So, sort of.
Let me
Yeah.
rephrase the question. The difference is we have fluffy, fun snow to play in versus weather that is just nasty.
So I like the weather that is nasty descriptor. I hesitate on the ice descriptor because ice takes down phone lines, which takes
Okay.
down computer signals, right, and all that stuff. So you have a really icy day, you could end up with a good old-fashioned snow day, right?
Okay.
But I think Dr. Bedell's been really clear to staff, and he was clear at this presentation last year, that he's not looking to end snow days for students
Okay.
and staff.
And then I guess, so I know at one point we had a hurricane that came through and we had a school that was shut down. If one school is shut down, do we have a virtual for the whole system? And do we have an idea of that?
So we ask for emergency waivers for single school
Okay.
situations like that, but we had situations last year. You may remember that there was a very bad wreck on the Severn River Bridge last year. We flipped the entire Broadneck cluster to virtual. So we have that flexibility to do that.
Great, thank you so much.
I think what's important is we're not going to take a cookie cutter approach to how we make these decisions when you have a oh man, I forget the square mileage. I asked you for that and you gave me the data.
A lot.
A whole lot. So we're just not going to take a cookie cutter approach to the decisions that we're going to make on how something that may impact a cluster versus the entirety of the system.
Okay, Ms. Corkadell?
So I was one of those no votes last year. Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Imagine that. Imagine that. But that stated, I mean, I guess one of my concerns is, and we experience it in a variety of different emergencies, is that our first responder families are barely scrambling to pull together cohorts to watch their children. At the same time, our teachers, many of them have families. And then we also have necessary workers, both at the federal, state, and local level. We, my memory serves, we're somewhere in the upper 20s, if not under 30s of, that's the profile of our community. And so I know that there's no penalty, but I am a little concerned, especially in the through second grade, for example, that would absolutely 110% require a parent, not a babysitter, to be involved. Because if the babysitter is babysitting, which is normally that teenager, that middle and high schooler who's filling in, because mom and dad, their businesses still have to operate. And some of our families operate some of the businesses themselves, not just our workers. So when I look at the front line and the 12-hour shifts and Snowmageddon and stuff, for example, I still do have reservations and would like to understand a little bit more about what that curriculum would look like, and then how do these other kids basically, they can make up the homework, but they can't make up the instruction time, and how many that's affecting, because when I do my math, it's about a third of our student population affected. So I would be curious to see a little bit more expanded on that to better understand it, because that's where I hear the complaints about is I can't be on the front line during that emergency, during that hurricane especially, or during that Snowmageddon incident. I mean, we're not talking about the one-off day necessarily. Those are last-minute calls, right? But when we're talking about, one day, maybe 2 days in a row, what is that looking like, and what are we doing to help that 30% roughly.
Are you
or-
saying in terms of the actual families or the educators?
Both,
Both.
because there are families too. And so one of the challenges we had when we had to do the shutdown and go to virtual was the first line workers. They needed to have childcare that actually had the ability to help their student with their learning, with their tools and everything else. And so that's where they opened up partial childcare during COVID, during the onset of COVID. But also we had teachers who were struggling because they can't watch their own kids and teach at the same time. So I was just wondering what level of rigor we're talking about and what those expectations are in that broader sense, understanding the case by case, just as we move forward with the conversation, because I don't have a good answer for them. Federal workers too, necessary people. I just think of all that group, and that's like the bulk of my community, where I live. So
You all aren't going to like this answer.
well, I like always an honest answer.
I mean, but
so
you're going to
I'm
get an
okay.
honest answer from me.
Yeah. I'm good.
Like, honestly, it's impossible to account for every single variable. It's just not practical. I mean, I lived through COVID like many other superintendents. The virtual aspect of it all wasn't as perfect as it needed to be. I think as a school district, we have a responsibility to assess damage in particular areas and to try to operate with some level of compassion in the decisions that we're going to make on how that impacts those who are delivering instruction in addition to those who have to receive instruction. But I mean, I don't know a single system that's going to be able to give you an answer of we're going to be able to control for variables A through Z. It's just not possible. And that's the answer I have, right?
So part of my question is really, what does the instruction look like?
I'll let you answer that.
Because that's where I'm getting at, because people have they look at this and they think of their last recent episode of it. And then the last bigger episode prior to that was Snowmageddon, which got really weird with the sidewalks, especially in the middle part of the county where people had always relied on contractors and weren't willing to go out and shovel, quite frankly. But understanding what that instruction looks like, I think would help alleviate people who do have had concerns and would be apt to just say, well, I'm going to have to skip it anyways, which we don't want happening with our kids.
So I will answer several parts of your question. The first part is we've always been, since I've been part of the school system, which has been over 40 years, we've never been a punitive school system. And so as such, we will continue to work with students and families to meet their individual needs, just like if they were absent for any other reason for that particular day. So that's the first piece. The second piece is, remember, the purpose of this type of instructional plan is for continuity of instruction. Its intended purpose is not really to introduce new learning. It's for simple continuity. So there will be a lot of self-paced options, especially at the secondary level. The third piece of that, and I think probably the most important piece, is the plan affords our superintendent the opportunity to decide between synchronous and asynchronous instruction. And your asynchronous instruction could be an option for those cases that you're talking about, where it doesn't have to be a student logging on at a particular time. They can log on and get the help with the parent as needed. And so I think those are the pieces, but I really want to stress the first part of it. We are not a punitive school system, and as such, we're going to continue to work with families. And if that's not happening, I would just ask that every member of the board or public, please make sure that you reach out to the school principal, and we will make adjustments as needed.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't have the opportunity to dry run it, so still, but that hesitation, I think maybe in communication as we continue this conversation, to have that sort of communication, that this is not because parents looked at that and my feedback was like, are you kidding me? So I got to take a day off, and I got this middle schooler here at home, and now I've got to take a day off because we're going to be rolling out instruction. And they got used to the real and hardcore instruction in virtual, I think. And, when I look at those duration things, that's where it gets, I think there's a little we would benefit from expanding a little bit more on what that could look like.
And I'm a historian, not a meteorologist, but as Mr. Mosier pointed out earlier today, we didn't have to utilize this option. And I'm hoping, and I know hope is not a way to run a business, but I'm hoping that this will be something that we use few and far between, and that we will continue to utilize instruction as we see it now. But the purpose is, it's an option if we have the hurricane, the September hurricane, or the Snowmageddon from 2010.
Yep. Well, we are a little past due on that big age thing, so let's hope we're granted some grace for a few more years.
Thank you.
Ms.
from
Ellis.
Mother Nature.
Thank you. I'm encouraged by the plan. I think I like the flexibility of it all. The one thing I don't see in there is how to actually create one of those old-fashioned snow days, because it seems like it's been a long time. So, Ms. Jackson, while you're not a meteorologist, I think you might have to be a god to make that happen, but it's been a long time.
I know it has been. In my last experience, when I lived in Severn, when I was working in Baltimore County, we had a snowstorm where we were out of school for 8 days. So I think I would rather end school early in June and let people start their vacation than to have a single snow day, but they are fun. They are fun. Make no mistakes about it.
Mr. Lynn.
So for required attendance taking, so that includes for asynchronous instruction as well, or just synchronous instruction?
That's a good question.
So the requirement for attendance taking?
Yeah.
Right, so if you log on, right, then the teacher can tell that you logged on and worked on your asynchronous piece.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
gotcha. And then so when you say that that it can't impact a student's grade negatively, so if a student weren't able to log on or join for any reason, whatever instruction takes place or assignments that are assigned during that synchronous or asynchronous time can be made up at a later time with no points taken off or anything?
Yeah, the state pathway says there has to be a meaningful opportunity for students to be able to do what you just described.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Okay, seeing no more lights, I would say there's good news and bad news. Maybe the bad news for Ms. Ellis and some others is that those good old snow days maybe seem like they're gone. As somebody that remembers what Dr. Bedell says, those snow days were really stress breakers. They were enjoyed. But you know, we often paid the price. And today, we don't have to pay the price because continuity of instruction is assured by our virtual day. So,
Thank you.
thank you so much.